Hello and welcome to another video. Now in this video I'm going to show you how you can take your MetaHuman character, export it into Maya, retarget motion capture data to your character and then export that data back into Unreal 4. I've seen a number of ways of doing this. They all look very good and they all seem to work, but I think I've discovered perhaps maybe a slightly more streamlined way of doing it, and certainly one that seems to be easier when it comes to actually getting your data from Maya and into Unreal 4 so that it actually connects your character correctly. To begin with, we're going to start in Quixel Bridge, and we take it one of the default characters and we're going to get it into Maya. There's a very simple export process and I go through that process and explain it fully in this video up here. If we go directly to Maya now, this is what we see when you export the character directly from Quixel's Bridge. This can be quite confusing because everything appears to be here that we actually need, and if we just turn on X-ray and show our joints, we can see this is the underlying skeleton and it's this one here in the outliner. The thing is that when you expand it out, you can see various constraints, and it also has this underscore DRV at the end of the joints. But then you've also got another rig here that's actually hidden, which has got the root node on it, which has got more simpler names. It seems to be that this skeleton here seems to drive this skeleton here. It can be confusing as to what skeleton you need to rig up. Now what we're going to do is not use this scene at all. We're going to use a different scene that Quixel also provide. Now, if we go back to Quixel's Bridge and we choose our character and go to the panel on the right, click on these three small dots and that will give you a menu, and the option you want to is go to files. Now, when you select this, a Windows Explorer will appear. And this is what you'll see. What you need to do is then go into these directories and start to find the original source asset. So we go to 8K, keep going even further until you get to this directory. Now you want this directory here, which is the same name as the MetaHuman character. If we go here and then down to where it says source assets, this will be the Maya files that we need to work with. Now this file here is the full rig and it's over 165 megabytes. So this is the original file which Quixel exports to Maya. Instead, we're going to use this file here and load it into Maya. When we do that, you'll see it looks very, very different. When loaded into Maya, this is what that Maya scene looks like. And as we can see from the outliner, it's nowhere near as complex as the original rig file that we saw that had been exported from Quixel Bridge. And this makes the whole scene and hierarchy just a lot easier to work with. And we're going to be working with this node here, this top node here, because that's where the skeletons are. And if you explore it, it basically shows you the same hierarchy that we saw. However, it's just easier to work with now, and we don't have to worry about any complex constraints or even the head rig that's inside the scene, because it's just not there. It's just the body rig only, which is all we really need. Now, to do the retargeting, we're going to be using HumanIK inside Maya, which is a perfectly good solution and works really, really well. Now, what I have done is you'll notice that character is obviously facing downwards because I've still got Maya set so that Y is up in its axis. And I did this deliberately because this is really important when it comes to working with HumanIK. HumanIK has certain requirements that it needs in order for it to work correctly. And one of those requirements is that it must be in the positive Z axis. In other words, the character must be facing positive Z. Now, what we're going to do here is we're not going to rotate the joints at all. We're going to rotate these top nodes. So we're just going to take the top node here and then go to our channel box, and we're just going to do in the rotate X minus 90. And that will get our character back up and now facing down positive Z. We can even, if we wanted to, rotate this around if it was in a different directory, so long as it's pointing in positive Z. Now we want to bring up HumanIK and we can now start the character definition stage. This is basically all about defining our skeleton inside HumanIK so that it can actually retarget mocap or animation onto it. Now when you bring up HumanIK, there's these two characters in the scene already. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to blitz these completely so that we're going to start entirely clean. Now once we have a clean scene, we can now start the character definition stage. We're going to choose this option here, create character definition. This gives us our empty template, and now it's all about assigning the required bones against the HumanIK template. The first thing we need to do is the reference node here. This is going to be our root node. So what we're going to do is if we go to our outliner, extend out the hierarchy. You could do it by clicking here in the viewport, but sometimes I always just choose it from the outliner outliner because I know I'm actually selecting exactly the node that I need to. Now there's a couple of ways in which you can assign stuff in HumanIK. The first one is to select the bone joint inside the outliner, go to your node that you want to assign it to in HumanIK, right click it and then assign selected bone, and that will now go green. The other way to do it is, for example, this here on the hips, we're going to choose the pelvis. We can double click this within the HumanIK window. You'll notice that it will grey out except for the one we've got highlighted, and all we do is we can just select the joint from the viewport or go to the outliner and just click it, and it's now assigned. So those are the two ways you can do it. How you do it is entirely down to you. There's a few little things you can do, shortcuts to even streamline it a bit more. One thing I would recommend you do is when you're doing this, defining your joints, is turn on this option here, which is the mirror matching. And what this basically does is when you assign a bone from one side of your skeleton, HumanIK will automatically look for the mirror on the other side and then automatically assign it if it recognizes it and also it's happy with the data that's on that joint. Now, a good example of that, let's just zoom in a little bit here. Now, I'm just going to select this bone here, and we can see here it is inside the outliner. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to double click it here and then choose it here. And you'll notice straight away, it's automatically done the right side for me. Now, what I can do as well, with this still selected, if I double click the left forearm here, now go back to my viewport. If I middle mouse click in this space, so I'm now inside the viewport. If I just go choose the down arrow, it's automatically selected it. And now I can do the same with the hand. So that's another little tip that you can use in order to streamline the selection process. I'm just going to now go through the rest of the nodes now, and then we should be more or less good to go. I've just got to now do the spine and then the neck. Also, this has got clavicles on it as well, so you may want to just tick these arrows here. This will take you into the shoulder view. So now I can actually just select this, choose my clavicle here, and it automatically does the other side. So I'm just going to go through the last remaining nodes in the spine, neck and head, and then we'll look at the next stage. We've now completed the character definition stage and we're ready to proceed with the retargeting. Now we can lock this character now using the padlock symbol to lock the definition, so we're not going to accidentally reassign any bones, but we are getting a warning here. Now you can proceed with this, you can lock it down, do the retargeting, and sometimes HumanIK will work and it will retarget. However, to get the best results, you really should deal with this problem because aside from the character needing to face down the Z-axis, the other requirement that HumanIK really needs is for it to be in a T-pose when the character is locked and retargeted. That it really does give you far better results, and also it will save you problems further on down the line. To fix these issues, it's really very simple. We just have to get the character in a T-pose, so its arms are up and they're in parallel to the X axis along this way, and our character's in an A pose, which is very common when it comes to building characters and rigs, because it's easier for modelers and asset creators to create their mesh in this pose, and then the character is often just rigged like that as well. Now HumanIK is actually quite flexible in this. Even though it needs a T-pose, it can work with these type of characters. All you need to do is just rotate the arms so they're roughly in the right position, and then you should be okay. If you want to be more accurate, what HumanIK can do here, it can help you out. So the idea is that just zoom in, select the joint in question. You can do it here, but I prefer to do it here in the HumanIK box, and then choose the axes that you need to rotate, which is our Y. And then I actually, rather than using the manipulators, I middle mouse click and drag in the viewport. And all I'm doing now is I'm just going to essentially eyeball it so it's roughly in position, so it's more or less straight. So I'm thinking somewhere around about minus 53, 54. And then once that one's done, just going to choose then the next one. This is a rotate Z. So again, and then keep an eye here, because what should happen if I get this into the right position, this should all turn green. I'm just going to rotate it around. There we go. And that's that. So we can see here that that's all green. Now this may not be very precise, but so long as this goes green, then HumanIK is satisfied. Now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to check the value here. So that's going to be minus 53. So I'm going to do the same on this side, and this one will be 33. And you'll see that's gone green as well. And that's it. With our character nodes all green, we've got a big tick there, which means that it's perfectly valid. We can now lock this definition, and now we can proceed with the retargeting. What we need now is some animation to retarget onto our character. I'm not going to choose anything special here. I'm just going to take a sample set that is provided in Maya and choose a simple run animation and import it in. These animations are already configured for HumanIK, so you shouldn't have much difficulty in connecting them to your character. Now, once inside the scene, that all kind of works, and we just need to choose it as the source to our MetaHuman character. So we can see here in our HumanIK controls, character 1 is our MetaHuman. It's all defined and all set up. Now we can just choose the run slow from our source, and HumanIK then does the automatic retargeting. So now this is done, this is now live, and again we can just play it back and just see how it looks, and we can start to make any adjustments. Nothing's been baked down at this moment in time, so that really gives us a good amount of flexibility to make some changes. Now if we just zoom in here, you'll notice there's a few things to be aware of. You might notice that the character is a slightly different proportion to the source mocap, and also things don't always line up. You can see here how the spine here is a slightly different shape and orientation to maybe our MetaHuman. Now HumanIK does a pretty good job of matching it up. It takes into consideration the different proportions of characters, so you usually do get a fairly accurate retarget. But what you might notice here is the shoulders of our MetaHuman are really sloping downwards and they're really pulling down. It looks really quite odd, so we need to fix those. Now in the HumanIK controls, you've got some very basic parameters here around the arms and the legs, which is okay, but you can't really get to the shoulders. So for example, I can choose the wrist here and use the IK blend, translate and rotate, or even make sure it pulls so I get it matched up precisely, and I get the rotation here, and I can make sure it always pulls, for example. That might work a little bit better, or maybe just adjust the translation here, but you can see how you change one and you have to compensate for another. So you've just got to be very mindful of what it is you're actually doing here and making sure you're not going to make the character look even worse than it might actually be. Now there are some additional controls which aren't available here, and I don't know why they're not exposed to people by default, but I wonder if it's just maybe just to keep things as simple as possible, because this stuff can get very complex. Now in order to access those controls, because I want to really fix these shoulders, and I know that I might have to compensate the arms a little bit, but I need to fix these shoulders first. What you do is you pick out any one of the joints, bones that you configured for your skeleton. So in this case the pelvis. Now if we go to our attribute editor and go to HIK properties, HIK properties 1 is usually the one it actually is. You'll now notice there's all these extra controls. Now these are, some of them are exactly the same as what you've got here. They go into greater depth around the character and also the solver. Now I'm not going to go through all of these, this is quite a deep topic to go through, but I'll just give you some basic highlights. The retargeting specifically is more about the basic retargeting that HumanIK does. For example, we can choose to match source. If I turn it on and off, you'll notice our character moves, and what this is doing is HIK is doing its best to match your character to the source animation. Even though there's slightly different proportions, it will always try and match it as close as possible, and you'll notice that here around the feet, and particularly around the ankle and the feet joints, it's literally constrained it almost perfectly. But of course that may not be what you want, and it might look slightly odd, so you can turn it off. And now you've got this offset, which is basically HumanIK taking into consideration the different scale of the characters. Now there's lots of things here. You can mirror the animation automatically, for example, so it's on the other side. You can also adjust the hips as well. It's done automatically, but you can put an offset in there. Same with the feet spacing as well. There's lots here to play around with, but the ones I want to really focus on here are these reach controls, and these are where you can really control how your character is going to try and reach to the source. Now if we look for our shoulders and we just find our left and right shoulder here, if I start to move the left shoulder controller, you can see now it's going to try and match the actual source. I can do the same with the right one. And this is all we probably need just to bring those shoulders ever so slightly up. And of course, because it's live, we can scrub the timeline and just see how that plays out. The arm seems to be matching pretty well here on the right, but of course you can also still make some compensations here. You may want to adjust maybe the elbow slightly. You may want to just go to the left wrist or right wrist to match that there. It's all about making very small adjustments just so that it kind of matches what you kind of want from your character. Same with like the left wrist there, you might want to just bring that in slightly, and then when you scrub the timeline, you might be kind of thinking, okay, this is happy, I'm happy with this now. So I'm not going to go too deep into all these controls because there's a lot here. You can look, if you scroll down the list, you can easily go into fingers and toes if you've got them set up. If you go further down, you can always make sure that the head and the chest is always pulled to be constrained. You've got specific left and right arm controls around the hand and elbow pulling. There's a lot here. You can even do floor contact as well to make sure that your feet won't go through a floor. But I'm just going to leave it at that and just take a look at this character now and just say, well, you know what? I'm kind of happy with this, such as it is. I'm now ready to proceed to the next step and now think about how I'm going to bake this retarget onto my skeleton and then prep it for export. Now for baking the animation, all I'm going to do now is just select the hierarchy. I'm not going to select anything else because I don't need anything else. I don't need these LODs or the meshes because we're actually going to export our MetaHuman into Unreal from Bridge because that's really what we want to put the animation on. So with these selected, we're down just going to go to export selection, choose FBX, choose a directory that we want to export to. It doesn't really matter, it could be anything. I'm just going to choose this. These are some tests I've done before, so this is going to be another version. Just check the options here. The main thing we want: animation turned on, bake animation is there for our timeline, deform model, skin, blend shapes, all that kind of stuff. Just going to leave it as is. I'm not going to change anything here and just go export selection. So that's going to basically take the hierarchy, bake the animation onto the skeleton and do the export to FBX. Now you might get a warning or error come up. This is very common with this stuff because you might have some extra nodes in there which it doesn't recognize. That's not a problem. You can just close this warning box and you should be good to go. Now inside Unreal, I've got a very simple project with a very basic level and I've got two MetaHumans. All I did was I went to Quixel Bridge, chose two characters, one of which is the character we've been using all along, and then just used their export process to get the assets into my Unreal project. And that's it. I'm not doing anything more complex than that. Now, before we bring in the animation, I just want to highlight the underlying skeleton and how this is going to influence what we're going to do. We just highlight the character in the world outliner. We can see by selecting the body, we can look at the skeletal mesh component which is being used. Now notice the name of it here, where it's got m_med_nrw_body. If we go back into Maya now and take a look at our retargeting scene, you'll notice that each one of the bones and joints in our rig has got the same naming convention as its prefix. So it's basically using the same naming convention, which is absolutely critical. We can see that this is the skeletal mesh, but this is the underlying skeleton which is being used. And what you'll see in many videos when it comes to retargeting characters in Unreal, not just MetaHumans, is that you'll need to use the retargeting manager. And what you do is you essentially set up a rig for the skeleton. In this case, it would be a humanoid. And because this is a MetaHuman character by Epic, it's compatible with the Epic naming convention, and it's also compatible with the UE4 mannequin. So it's very easy to make this work. So they would assign the humanoid rig and then they'd go to the skeleton tree and say, we need to change an option here, and that's the retargeting options. So you highlight them here and you'll notice that these are all set to animation from the root and then relative below it. And you would right click this and set it to all skeleton, and then so you do this and then set this up to animation and then set this up to animation and then save it. Now we're not going to do that. We're actually going to change this and just set it back to what it was. We don't need to do anything to this now. We're going to use the options straight as it comes from the direct import. We're not going to make any changes. And the simple reason for that is we don't need to retarget anything. And the reason why we don't need to retarget anything is because we've actually already done it. We've done it here. We've done it in Maya instead of doing it in Unreal. And what we've done is, because we know that this is the underlying skeleton, or it's the same underlying skeleton, the naming convention, that we've baked the animation onto the skeleton. So when we import it into Unreal 4, it will recognize that. So all we need to do is on the import options, make sure that we attach it to the MetaHuman base skeleton, and it should all work. So now we're just going to close all this because we don't need it. Now what we do, we go to our test directory and we're going to import the animation. So right click, import, choose the FBX file that we exported. And now from our import options at the very top here where we choose the skeleton. So this is the skeleton we want to use for the imported asset. So of course, if you leave it none, it will create a new skeleton, but we must specify something. But we're going to choose now from the drop down MetaHuman based skeleton and just import. And that's it. We actually don't need to do anything else. If we actually go back to our options, if we double click the skeletal mesh again, if we just choose our skeleton, we know this is going to work, because if we just go to preview animation, we now have, without even retargeting anything, the actual asset we just imported. If I choose that, it just works. So now we know this works with no retargeting whatsoever inside Unreal. What we can now do is simply get a sequence going. Let's bring in let's populate our MetaHuman. We don't need a control rig, so we can delete that. And now under the body here, select track, animation, and then scroll to the bottom where our imported animation is. Choose that, and there it is. It's already in there. And we can even do the same with the other character as well. So we'll get her in. Let's get her into the scene. And then also populate her in the sequencer. Delete the control rig. And then add the same animation. And there we go. And of course, now we've got it here, we can just drag this to wherever we need to. Get our playback range working. And then we should be pretty much good to go. There we go. Obviously, I've got some offset there because the animation is finished. But again, we can actually just tidy that up. Let's make it look a little bit more prettier. Get it matched up. There we go. So everything else works exactly as we expect it to. So I've been able to do this without using the retargeting whatsoever. So again, you see some people, they'll bring new animations in, and when they've set up the skeleton, they'll bring up the animation file, right click this, and then retarget anim assets and do duplicate anim assets and retarget. And that brings up the retargeting inside Unreal. But we've not had to do that because, again, we've done it in Maya already. And this is a far more easier workflow because there's nothing wrong with the way people have done it previously. If that works for you, that's perfectly fine. I'm not here to say that their method is wrong in any way, but if you find it easier to work in packages like Maya and doing your animation in Maya, then all you need to do is get the skeleton in there from Quixel Bridge and then configure it. So you could have your own animation rig, you could use HumanIK, and if you're comfortable with animating in Maya, get your animations all set up, bake it out to the skeleton here, which is the MetaHuman skeleton, and then on the import, then just make sure you choose the MetaHuman base skeleton from these import options. That is the key thing to all of this. Make sure that you choose the base skeleton because then it will just automatically match. You don't need to do any retargeting. It just matches up. So that's basically my method for getting animation or mocap data retargeted onto your MetaHuman, exported from Maya, and then imported and put onto your MetaHuman character in Unreal 4. So I hope you found that really useful. Give it a go, and I hope it works for you. And if it does, then please comment below and let me know and like this video. It's really good to know that people see my content and they like it and they're getting something from it. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.